Let's say a very good morning to Talk's international editor, Isabel Oakeshott. Isabel, how are you?
Morning, very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. I had a rather bizarre conversation with our last guest, who seemed to think that it was okay to kind of equate cancer and obesity as two diseases that we need to treat in a similar kind of way. I'm slightly uneasy about paying loads of taxpayers' money to people who are overweight in order to get them to be not overweight. What do you think?
Yeah, I heard the conversation and I agree with you. I really don't like the idea of bribing people in order to lose weight. I mean, becoming fit and in good shape is actually a lifelong habit. So if you're paying somebody, and I haven't seen the details of the proposal, but if you're paying somebody for a short period of time to lose a specific amount of weight or some such, that might work for that short period of time or until they've collected their first 400 quid or whatever it is.
Right.
Then what's going to happen a year on or 2 years on? You have to actually want to be fit. You have to want to be in shape. Otherwise, it's just the whole yo-yo dieting thing, which is so familiar to so many of us, and it is tough to lose weight. This Wegovy drug and its various different names that it's come under has proven to be honestly something of a wonder drug. It has helped an awful lot of people. What we don't know is what the effects of that would be taking it over a very, very long period of time, and I still don't think it's a substitute for just eating sensibly and exercising as much as you need to do to burn off the calories that you've eaten. It's
well,
really
this is it. And I mean, his argument that, well, the alternatives are just as expensive. Well, yeah, they're just as expensive because you're similarly subsidising people to do things like having gastric type surgery or taking Wegovy, which is money, with taxpayers' money effectively to fix something that you could fix in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible argument. This starts with education. It starts with making exercise part of your daily routine and trying to find things that you actually enjoy. You know, even if it's just walking the dog, it's a cultural thing. You know, explaining to people that even if you just go for a walk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you know, several times a day, that makes all the difference. Simply giving people handouts, I think, is a kind of awful insight into the culture that is creeping along in our society, which is that people should just sit on the sofa and wait for things to be brought for them. It's a kind of extension of the Deliveroo culture. You know, you sit on your sofa, carry on watching TV, we'll bring you fast food and we'll also bring you £400 to lose the weight you're putting on.
Yes. It's a very odd way to sort of frame healthcare, it seems to me, and particularly when we don't have enough healthcare to look after people who are genuinely suffering from what I call proper diseases like cancer, like liver disease, like heart problems, all of those things. And I know that they'll say, oh yeah, but that's partly caused by obesity. Well, yeah, it might be, but it's not. I mean, cancer is the biggest single problem in this country, and we ought to devote all the money that we've got to fixing it.
Yes, I mean, the caller was absolutely right, and you're not denying that there is a link between obesity and cancer. But your point is one thing that you can definitely control, which is whether or not you're fat. And the second thing you can't definitely control, as you rightly pointed out, you know, you can be an absolute saint, never drink, never smoke, never get fat, and you can still be very unlucky and get cancer. I mean, there are non-smokers who get lung cancer. So, I mean, this has always been a difficult area of health policy. To what extent do we, in a sense, quote, punish people for their lifestyle choices? And the NHS doesn't do that. The NHS is not judgmental, but there is an argument, which I'm probably in favour of, that the NHS needs to be a bit more judgmental. And already they are sensible enough, doctors are sensible enough, of course they are, to say, look, you can't have certain operations until you've lost X amount of weight, because the operation won't be effective and you'll be stuck in bed, you know, for much longer. So I think there has to be some responsibility for people taking responsibility for themselves.
No question. Perhaps the most surprising thing about the entire story is that, one, it's only aimed at one gender, and two, that they were able to use the word men without having to qualify it, that, you know, it might be also people that identify as men who can get the 400 quid. You know, no doubt there'll be some trans man who wants to sue them for not being available for the money.
Oh, I'm afraid you're predicting something that's just all too depressingly predictable there. Yeah, you're right about that. But obesity has become such a massive problem within the NHS, even to the point that their equipment no longer actually works for some of the largest. You know, having to invest in bigger beds, bigger X-ray machines, bigger things, bigger bits of kit, because basically people are so fat they can't actually fit into normal sized spaces.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. Let's talk about the front page of the Daily Mail, a story that you wouldn't think would have to be a front page story, but unfortunately is because of the times in which we live. Sex education to be banned for under 9s and no more gender dogma. And this story's been around for a couple of days, I know, but Gillian Keegan is going to unveil these plans for a total ban on what has been completely bonkers madness for many a year.
So I was really pleased to see this. Some of the reporting of it has been a little bit confusing because yesterday this was reported to be guidelines for schools. Today I understand that it is actually going to be statutory. So the government will tell schools that they're not allowed to do certain things. And that is much more encouraging because whatever a sensible, semi-sensible, at least conservative leader or conservative education secretary might wish, we all know that the education system is absolutely full of hard left-wing zealots who preach this stuff. You know, it is an ideology. There's a cult-like status to some of this gender ideology, and it permeates the education system like a kind of poison. And so it's encouraging to know, to hear that the government will actually lay down the law on this. Although I do worry that in a few months' time, if we have a change of government, as seems extremely likely, this will be watered down, and it won't have got onto statute books because at the moment there isn't a huge amount of time to get things into law, especially things that will be disputed. There's a real worry that Labour will water this down, and indeed that schools will ignore it anyway.
Well, indeed, as they have, and I think you've pointed this out many times, that they have already ignored the law, which says that you must have separately gendered toilets in schools, particularly in secondary schools. An awful lot of schools just ignored that, and they've got gender-neutral ones.
Yes, that's right. And the other thing that these new proposals say is that parents will absolutely have the right to view or be to be shared the materials that are being used in sex education classes. Good schools will already do that. I mean, I certainly, a couple of years ago, had a very useful conversation with one of my children's PHSE teachers because they sent out a letter saying, look, this is on our curriculum for this year or this term, and we're going to be covering this and that issue. And I wanted to sort of be on top of things and to know what they were going to cover under certain areas. What are they teaching about this gender ideology? And I was really reassured. But in many cases, parents have no idea what their children are being taught. And as a parent, it is also hard. We're all busy. You don't want to have to be constantly calling the school. So ideally, you want a level of trust there that your children aren't being brainwashed with a load of, frankly, deeply confusing and very contested twaddle.
Yeah, no question at all. Twaddle, a very good word for it, I think. Very well said. I don't know if you've seen this insistence from Professor Brian Bell this morning, who apparently is the government's chief migration advisor. I've not come across him before. I don't know whether he's the good kind of Bell or the bad kind of Bell. But he's saying this morning that we have a fighting chance of getting migration down, that's legal migration, down to 150,000 a year. It's a far cry from what they promised in 2019, isn't it?
I mean, when are we talking about here? 2040, maybe? You know, when the climate change zealots will say, well, you know, everything's dried up to a crisp. Yes. People are already too disempowered to come here.
Right.
I've got no confidence whatsoever that those figures are remotely realistic at any time, frankly, ever.
No.
You know, the government has lost control of our borders. This government, in theory, well, we know that they've repeatedly promised to bring down net migration, have never, ever done so. All it's done is steadily gone up and absolutely exploded. And the next government has been completely evasive about how many people they think should be allowed to come into the country legally every year. I've tried to push Labour spokespeople on this again and again. They never come up with anything. They'll always say, well, it's according to need. Well, that's a complete cop-out.
Yes.
one person's need is another person's. Let's not bother training our own people to do any of these jobs. So I really don't think this is very likely.
No.
We're going to get new figures out in the next couple of weeks, and I think they'll be shocking. But I don't even trust the figures that come out. I think the government has no idea, and whatever you see needs to be taken with a huge pinch of salt.
Exactly right, because they seem to have discovered via this report from Professor Bell, they didn't really expect so many people to be brought with those who are coming on student visas. When they said to them, oh, you can bring some dependents with you, they didn't realise that there was going to be some ludicrous number of dependents which actually counted more than the visas they were issuing. I mean, it's completely and utterly foreseeable, except they didn't foresee it.
Well, that scheme is a complete scandal. How many students do you know that have dependents? I mean,
none.
Students, they don't. How can they have dependents? First of all, they're supposed to pay for their courses. So unless the course is incredibly part-time, how are they also running a job in order to support dependents? I don't get it. It's just a fiction, this. It's just a complete and utter scam.
Right.
And it is no surprise that has been widely exploited by plenty of people from less well-off countries than our own who bring their whole families over. This is the case because we've seen the statistics. Well, surprise, surprise, wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
If you live in a developing country and you've got the opportunity to pay a couple of £100 for a course that you never actually attend, because there's plenty of that goes on, and you can bring your auntie and your granny and someone who needs cancer care and, your sister who's pregnant and can then get free treatment on the NHS. And I'm not making this up, folks. It's real. This is what is happening.
Yeah. It is absolutely what's happening, and I've been saying this, and I think you have as well, for years and years and years, that not only are these people coming here under false pretences, but they are then staying here after the course is finished, long after the course is finished, and as we now know from Home Office statistics, many of them are applying for asylum. And many of them are getting it. And then they get the relatives in, and then they get the dependents in. And so you're effectively creating an entire legal migration route, which is going to kind of double the population in about 50 years.
Yes, and when you hear the left say, well, there's this whole canard about how, well, no wonder lots of people come over here in small boats because there's no other safe route to do it. I mean, this is a load of complete and utter nonsense. There is every which way to get into this country legally, as the extraordinary figures time after time show is happening. It's not that you have to have some incredible job offer. You may be able to get in as a student and bring in your family, and there are many, many other loopholes or supposed gaps in the market from, social care or ballet dancers or artists or whatever else happens to be on the list at the moment, fruit pickers. And once you're in, you're in. We all know that the Home Office, Border Force, don't have the resources to routinely follow up on people, so-called overstayers, so they just melt into the black economy.
I know, shocking. I'm going to leave you with one which I'm hoping won't cause you any domestic strife. Story in the Mail today saying that the French have started a new campaign for drivers. They've issued an edict to male drivers to say, please drive more like a woman. Now, I mean, I'm not one of those people that says women are worse drivers than men, but it's quite a surprising thing to suggest, isn't it?
Well, where to begin with this one? I mean, I wish everyone drove like me. I'm a brilliant driver. I'm particularly good. I'm a brilliant parker. Anyone who lives in a place where there's never any parking gets brilliant at parking. So everyone should drive like me. And yeah, I think it's great advice. OK, brilliant. Isabel, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor there.